So, wait a minute, Delius replied. You're telling me that the energy we produce is the same that came from this core from which the Big Bang started? Yes, Delius. And as I was saying, that's what brings me to my next theory. When I was thinking over it, why exactly you and Hagara and your entire race would still produce this radiation when the rest of the universe has disseminated it into all the countless forms, an idea came to me while thinking about Hagara himself. Listen, Delius, I know to us, speaking of Hagara as a living being seems normal. In our system, it's simply the way things are. But the rest of the universe isn't like that. Most other people's planets are just planets. They're not alive, they don't travel or eat other planets. They're just balls of rock with squishy molten cores. So why is yours alive? Why does it go through this cycling process of sleeping and gathering planets and stars in its wake, and then waking up and eating them, before journeying off to somewhere to repeat the process? I mean, from all other communications with intelligent races out there in the universe that we've had, we've never come across anything like it. I mean, sure, there are some spacefaring creatures, but they're few and far in between. And there's absolutely nothing on the scale of Hagara, at least in any records that we've come across in trying to search for information. He seems to be completely unprecedented, both in scale and in the energy he produces. But why is that? And that's when the idea of scale itself came into the concept. Initially brought about when I started thinking about some of our first conversations with you that I looked back on in the records. You described all of us like simply part of a chain, that to us we seem normal size to each other. But to Hagara, we simply seem like fleas riding on his back. It's the scale difference between us that makes Hagara seem great, at least to us. Massive and extraordinary in stature and size. But tell me something, Delius. If all matter in the universe was in a single location, all gathered, focused into one point, Hagara wouldn't seem big in comparison to that. Now would he? In fact, he'd seem quite insignificant. As great as Hagara is, he's nothing in comparison to that sort of size and stature, planet gobbler or not. And that's exactly what I think Hagara is. I think Hagara is an organism that exists and originates from the core of the universe, the Big Bang from which everything started. Originally, it was all one focal point, right? As I explained before. But one question that people never ask is how long that central core remains that way. Exactly how long does all the matter in the universe sit in that central core before it explodes outward and creates the rest of the universe? We give a great deal of lenience to the importance of our own existence, thinking that the universe itself is what's greater, and that the Big Bang was simply the method by which it happened, by which true importance was gained. But what if that's not the case? What if the process of life, death, and the circle between them existed on that core, like it was just one big world that sustained for a long amount of time before detonating into the rest of the universe? If that were the case, then it also might be the case that things might have evolved and adapted to live in that world of infinite mass and infinite density, the infinite space, their home, a space overflowing with core energy, the sustenance that all things existed in. I think that's where Hagara evolved. that he is, at minimum, one species that came to exist within the core that created the Big Bang, and that somehow, despite the force of the Big Bang itself, when it happened, Hagara wasn't destroyed, that he simply got spread out into the rest of the universe, just like everything else, but survived the explosion itself. In fact, there might even be more of him. Other creatures like him that existed within that core. Gargantuan entities that thrived on the specific core radiation from which all life in our universe is derived, and were scattered to the wind upon its destruction. And now, they live in cycles throughout the universe, just like Hagara, simply waiting. Waiting, Delius replied. Waiting for what? What exactly would they be waiting for? For it to return, Delius. For their home to return. What do you mean, return? That's not possible. Well, I'm afraid it's inevitable, Delius. It is in fact the end of all things, what you might call the universal apocalypse. According to this Big Bang theory, the universe itself does have a lifeline. Eventually, it will end. As the force from the Big Bang subsides and our universe ceases to expand, eventually, the gravitational forces will draw everything in it back to the center. As our universe grows older, eventually, all of the planets, the stars, and everything else that exists within it will begin to be pulled back towards the center, clashing, colliding, and impacting as they all crush into that one central finite point, until everything that we know is once again a single point of infinite mass and infinite density. Don't you get it, Delius? Hagara is waiting for the universe to end, for the planet that he originated on to reform, so that he can go about his normal life. Right now, he's just taking snaps, snacks, and napping while he waits for it. In fact, for all we know, Hagara could have seen multiple Big Bangs. This could be, well, the 100th time our universe is reformed. There's no knowing. Hagara could be older than our universe itself, simply waiting, taking his place as the cycle repeats, just as you ride upon his back as he completes his cycle of rest, consumption, and then rest again. He rides upon the back of the universe itself, simply a flea in its comparison. And this moment right here, our existence, the existence of the universe, is simply him riding out the rough moments, the hard times, before the being whose back he rides settles, and he can live peacefully once again until the cycle repeats. As Delius heard the words, he was absolutely astonished, shocked. It all seemed to make sense, and it was at that moment that Delius smiled. Delius? What are you happy about? I just told you the universe is going to end eventually. Why are you smiling? I'm sorry, Delius replied, scratching his head a bit. It's just that, well, I was right. Or my people were. Everything is part of the cycle. It appears even as great as Hagara is, even he is not beyond it. I wonder, do you think Hagara has kids? Or possibly will ever have kids? In fact, in terms of age, it actually gives a new standard. I mean, how do you apply an age to something that outlives the universe? Is Hagara old or young? Do they reproduce, and if so, how often? Is it once every cycle of Big Bang universe and then back to central point? It's actually a bit interesting to think about, Delia said with a smile, as Asa returned the smile. You know, Delius, you may be a warrior, but strangely enough, I think you might have a little scientist in you, she said as they smiled together, enjoying the moment.